Welcome to the Scale with Stride podcast, the place where you come to listen to some of the world's most influential leaders of the SaaS industry. I'm your host, Adam Richardson, and on today's episode, I'm excited to welcome you to Season 2. We kick off the season with a man who needs no introduction. If I say the words, "Hey salespeople," you'll know, of course, I'm referring to industry thought leader Jeremey Donovan. Jeremey is Executive Vice President of Revenue Operations and Strategy at Insight Partners. He's also an author, thought leader, the man behind SellingSherpa, and has over 25 years of industry experience, having worked for the likes of Gartner, SalesLoft and CB Insights. Some of my key takeaways from today's conversation: breaking down RevOps. What is it? How does it help your business? And why is it so important? How to know when you're ready to make your first RevOps hire, and what skill sets you should look for when making that hire. Let's dive in. So, Jeremey, thank you very much for joining us on the Scale with Stride podcast. I really appreciate you giving up your time today, and really excited for the conversation that we're going to have today. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Awesome to chat, Adam.
Good stuff. So for a man that doesn't really need an introduction, you've got a huge following on LinkedIn, very well respected within the industry. And I just want to sort of start off with, you're the Executive Vice President for Revenue Operations and Strategy at Insight Partners. So just to start things off, tell us, what does that role entail?
Yeah, so super high level. Insight is a VC firm. We have about $80 billion of assets under management, over 500 portfolio companies, and we divide our world into two pieces, the investment side and the advisory side. So I am on the advisory side, having operated in revenue functions, but also actually marketing. I was a CMO once, and engineering and products, so I've done a bunch of different things in my career. But the job at this point is to help our portfolio companies grow more efficiently. I think we used to say grow, now we say grow efficiently. So that's the job, and that just means talking to them about revenue, operations, and strategy pillars. And strategy for me is about people, process, and technology in that order. So yeah, I'm sure we'll get into a bunch of that today, but that is it in a nutshell.
Good stuff. And I suppose for someone like yourself who's had such a strong career as an operator, with lots of success to shout about, how have you found the transition from, I suppose, like executing daily, being in the weeds and being the operator to then moving more to like an advisory role as opposed to coaching from the sidelines kind of thing? How have you found that transition?
It's a bit funny because in a way, my career has come full circle. I worked very briefly as a semiconductor engineer, but then I became a semiconductor industry analyst. And I really think that this job is like being an analyst. It's almost a hybrid of an analyst and a CSM. It's a very service-oriented job, right? And because we're typically minority investors, there's a big difference between VC and PE, as I've discovered in the job, is on the VC side, you're reactive. So you're not really going and being directive about what people should do. You're giving them options about what they can do when they come to ask you. So yeah, it's a little bit of coming home to my roots, because I was an analyst for 8 years earlier on in my career. And
at your time at Gartner.
Yeah, at my time at Gartner. I mean, I found the transition to be I guess delightful in a way, because I love to learn and I love to teach. If I weren't doing this, I would be, I think, a high school math and computer science teacher. So this is my version of it.
I was going to ask the question because given your background, particularly from the electrical engineering and statistics kind of academia, what you would have been if you weren't doing what you were doing now, but you took the words right out of my mouth. So yeah, well,
I was going to say, I actually thought about it. I thought about, call it active retirement, I guess, as a teacher. And because I think it's a very admirable profession. I'm also interested, obviously, in the subject matter. Ultimately, the reason I'm not doing it right now is I think it's a degree of flexibility. I think as a teacher, you have a little less flexibility. And I've talked to a lot of teachers, and they said It's about the teaching, but it's also about managing the expectations of the parents, which is a little bit of a pain. So I'm avoiding dealing with that.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And as opposed to, it definitely would lean into the fact that you're an avid reader. You're a scholar. You've written books. You seem to, you've got the sales Sherpa. Seems like reading and studying is definitely a passion of yours.
Love to learn, and I do definitely believe what separates great um, people in the workplace. It is outwork absolutely, and outlearn, right? And learning can be, I guess, passive, I guess, in a way, from reading books and consuming content. And I think also it needs to be active. Is that I've had the good fortune in my career, not at all times, but certainly in the last 10 to 15 years, of having incredible bosses who, you know more. They either know more than me, or even if they don't know more than me, they know how to call my BS, right? And refocus me. And I'm none of us are flawless, right? Like, I'm plenty flawed in the workplace. So to course correct me is really useful.
Well, I love that outwork and outlearn. I think my business partner Alex, he's got a real man crush on you. He's the avid reader. He'll read a book, he'll reread it, he'll write his notes. That's his way how he consumes and remembers things. So I think if we were to put you two in a room together, you'd be sat there all day going on, about the different books that you've read, and I think you'd get on pretty well. But no, but love to hear that. So, I think in terms of wanting to dive straight into the bulk of today's conversation, which is naturally all geared around RevOps, I think, to kick the conversation off, what is RevOps, and why is it so important in today's world?
Yeah, so I think actually one of the best ways to explain this is one of the CROs I used to work for, Sean Murray, who's now the CRO of Greenhouse, once said to me, "Hey, Jeremy, you work on the business and I'll work in the business." And I don't know that it's always that clean of a separation, but I appreciated it. So in the business meant, like, what's going on quarter to quarter, right? Yes, he was also making big strategic decisions, but with the execution of, uh, I think, being his thought partner on strategy, and then the execution of turning that strategy into, like, actual implementation, that was the job. And what does that mean, right? I think there are 5, 6 core responsibilities within RevOps. And mind you, RevOps is a bit of a rebranding of what everyone called sales operations before,
Yeah.
with an asterisk. I'll get to the asterisk in a second. So the core responsibilities: strategy and planning work, which could be divided, between a formal RevOps team and a FP&A team. Analytics and forecasting, again, those things could be divided. What a lot of people think of in RevOps is the systems and data side. So that's part 3. Part 4 is working on comp and quota. Part 5 is territory. And part 6, again, which could be in other places, is deal desk. So those, to me, are the core responsibilities. And then, if you will, those are almost, I don't know, we'll call them horizontal responsibilities in a way. And then the vertical responsibilities would be, whether that applies to sales, whether that applies to customer success, whether that applies to marketing. So it's almost that, that intersection, those intersection points of those responsibilities with those particular functions.
And if you were to explain it to, say, let's say you were explaining it to a 5-year-old in its most simplistic terms, what was the purpose of it?
If super well, I don't know that a 5-year-old would necessarily get this one, but the most simple way to explain it is it's a way to increase sales productivity. How do I help sellers sell more? I think when I was 5 years old, I was selling mangoes because we had a mango tree, and I would set up a little table in front, and I would sell mangoes for probably a quarter a piece. I don't know, maybe it was a dime. I don't know, way back in the day, right? So, like, if I was explaining to my 5-year-old self, revenue operations would be helping me figure out how to sell more mangoes per hour, so I could go buy more, whatever, kites and baseball cards and whatever trinkets at what used to be called a 5 and dime store. Again, I'm dating myself there.
Well, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the host turned around and said, imagine you're explaining this to a Labrador, and I thought, I don't know how he's going to get around this one. So I went with the 5-year-old.
Yeah, I take it quite literally. I guess there was a dog in that movie Up that could talk. No, if the dog could talk, you'd be all right.
Fair enough. And I suppose, as a recruiter, we saw such a significant spike post-COVID in that 2021 boom. There was a huge spike in demand for RevOps across, all seniorities within the business unit. Why do you think that was, particularly given the timing? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely have seen it in our portfolio, but then also getting recruiter messages on LinkedIn. I think it was a realization that we needed to find a way to become more productive, because the growth at all costs was just throw lots of bodies at the problem. And then here you were sitting in a situation where your sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue had exploded, which means your CAC payback, which that's an input into, had exploded. CAC is customer acquisition cost, which is your sales and marketing costs relative to what you bring in. So, the long CAC payback times, really high sales and marketing expenses. You got to figure out how to get more efficient, and someone's got to solve the problem, right? And if the CRO and the sales team is working in the business, fighting to win deals, which things just became, they were just gradually and suddenly, I guess, becoming more and more competitive, right? There's 10 or 15 or 20 companies doing every category of everything. You got to find a way to get more productive. So I think that's where the demand for RevOps came in, was leverage in the business.
Yeah. And so I know you touched on it just previously. So if I'm sat, around a board table and we're talking about the thoughts of bringing someone in to focus on the business, as you put it, what are the points that I should be getting across in terms of how RevOps can help your organization increase revenue and become more profitable? So how does it do that?
I think I'm going to come back to those core responsibilities. And I think there's maybe a RevOps maturity cycle of the way that leadership, CEO, CRO view, and even CFO, I guess to some extent, view RevOps. The version 1 of it is RevOps is just my systems people, right? They run Salesforce and that's it. And if you couldn't do anything else, you do have to keep the lights on. So that is keeping the lights on. That's not necessarily going to improve your sales productivity dramatically. But I think it's really by way of example with use cases. So in the last operating job that I had, I was at a company called SalesLoft that does sales engagement software. And
we're a customer.
Yeah, every quarter we would do a sprint on the team, and that sprint was one thing that we thought would have the single biggest impact on our ability to continue growing. That was the thing, was you didn't want to be the person or the team that was responsible for slowing the revenue growth of the company. So one of the sprints, for example, was that we reps had tons and tons of accounts, and it's unproductive for them to research every one of those accounts, prioritize them, figure out which ones to go after. They just don't have the time and the ability to do that. So, we did a sprint for a quarter where we went deeply analytical. This is where, the statistics and math comes in, and programming. We went deeply analytical and built a quite sophisticated account scoring model that prioritized those accounts for the sales reps. And now they could just kind of go in and sort by priority of company, the account priority score, and go in. So that has the ability to help them be way more productive. Another one is territory. So you can take those account scores and you can build equal potential territories. Compensation, right? If you have the right motivation for people, right, they're much more likely to be productive. So they're all levers. It's extremely difficult to measure the impact of one thing. How do you measure the impact of better account prioritization? Again, the measure was more, were we able to meet or exceed our growth targets?
Yeah. And from your experience, as an operator in this space, in an organization like SalesLoft that's had such success, from some of the key initiatives that you ran in RevOps, like what would you say was some of the most impactful? Like what really helped move the needle in terms of like sales productivity, shall we say?
Yeah. Account scoring and territory assignment, I would say were really big needle movers. Maybe I'll cite two more since I already said those two. Another one, I had a very close partner in crime there, who I he was the head of sales enablement, and the two of us worked together on making sure that some of these kind of other education got to the rep. So the where I'm getting at here is deal reviews. I think deal reviews are probably one of the most effective things you can do to improve performance, especially on the enterprise, mid-market, and enterprise sales side.
And are you talking both won and lost, or just deals won?
More, well, deal reviews, not while the deals are open, while the opportunities are open. So, going in and applying some kind of rigorous framework for evaluating deal health on a regular basis. So it's both the methodology that you're using as well as the cadence that you're applying, whether that's MEDDIC or whatever you're using. So that I think was a big needle mover for productivity. The other one I would say is we did a customer success sprint as well, and the CS sprint there's a bit of a story behind this one. We had a dip in CSAT at one point, and that dip in CSAT happened. Remember, there was a period right after the COVID restrictions were lifted for the first time. This was before Omicron, and there was this thing called the Great Resignation. So when that Great Resignation happened, we lost a whole bunch of customer success and support people. They just moved, and we then so CSAT dropped on some of the support tickets, and we thought, okay, we're going to hire people, but we need to ramp them, and that takes time. We also need some technology in place to help. So again, it's not just the tech; it's people, process, and technology. But we did two things on the customer success and support side. On the support side, we put in, this is pre-Gen AI, we put in an AI tool that allowed customers to self-serve. So it read all of our historical support tickets and gave them the ability to basically have an AI-based chat bot that would answer their questions. And it could do that via chat or email response. And if it didn't answer the question, they wanted to talk to a person, they could. But that made us a ton more efficient on the support side, and the CSAT scores went back up. The other piece was on customer success. So, our CSMs, just as a lot of places do, they got dumped a whole bunch of accounts, and they just need to figure out what to do. And a lot of that is reactive. So just like we did an account score for potential accounts, we did a customer health score for existing accounts that had 25 different factors inside of that. And then we knew that there were certain plays we could run that if there was an issue with the health on a particular dimension, we would queue the CSM up to say, like, hey, there's an engagement issue in this account, or hey, they only have one third-party integration, and we know if they have a second third-party integration or more, then they're much more likely to renew. So we would queue up these next best actions for the CSMs based on customer health. So that was another needle-moving thing.
Ah, nice, interesting. And then, RevOps is a term that's increasingly become more and more used. It's more in demand from a skill set perspective. There's more and more individuals within software companies, even at an earlier stage now, where people are sort of building with the future in mind rather than getting to a certain scale, then bringing it in and trying to get the house in order. How do you know when you're ready for RevOps? Like, are there any leading indicators to say like now would be a good time, or is it around like infrastructure? You talk about people, process, and technology. Like, what is it that would be a determining factor to say you're ready and able to have an individual come in and make a positive impact in that kind of role?
Yeah, well, we do benchmark in our portfolio when, like, think about ratios of RevOps to, let's say, like AEs, CSMs, SDRs, right? People who are sales and sales support types of roles. So, I think the first RevOps hire is very often a systems person because, again, you have to keep the lights on. So that person is usually managing the CRM. Um, that that person's probably coming in when there's, I don't know, 10-ish sellers. Before that, and I don't, there's not an exact cutoff, but before that, you probably got somebody doing multiple hats. You might even have a salesperson who is doing some of the CRM stuff, or you've outsourced, which is quite common, right, to an agency, which I think is probably even better idea. But yeah, the typical ratio is like, for a very early stage, 10 or 11 to 1. So once you have, as I said, 10, 11 people on the sales team, it's time to hire a RevOps person. And that ratio then creeps up over time to like 15 to 1 as companies go, 10 million, 100 million. So I think you just kind of go by those staffing ratios, and then you just add things sequentially. So you're going to start off with the CRM person. I think the second hire is going to be probably someone is going to be much more focused on deeper analytics and forecasting. There's no perfect order here. It's based on your need. The next person, I think, should be that person who has the strategy and planning chops. So they're going to be a little bit more senior. You might even have the CRM person and the analytics person report into that strategy and analytics person. At that phase, comp and quota and deal desk are probably being done by finance, but over time, right, you can absorb those functions into RevOps and free the FP&A people up a bit. And then, territory tends to be a little bit more sophisticated. So that's probably your next hire. That's the order I would roughly go in as I was building it out.
So yeah, so like you said, so building out in stages, but the sort of hiring triggers for RevOps would be based on the size of your sales organization.
Yeah, I think that's really important, by the way. Like, I don't know whether it's CFOs listening or sales professionals, RevOps people, but one thing I've always done when I've gone into a RevOps role is I don't want to have a negotiation with the CFO every X number of, weeks, months. What I do is I go in and I just negotiate, and I say, look, here's the benchmark for the ratio of RevOps people to salespeople defined as, again, AEs, CSMs, SDRs, what have you, however you define that. And let's build out the financial plan so that we're going to hire to have enough RevOps support given those ratios over time. And that, to me, has always worked out very well. Then I don't have to negotiate. Then there's no questions. It's like, I went 4 years at SalesLoft without having to renegotiate that agreement and with the CFO. So we were just able to continue staffing.
Yeah. Okay. So you've given like a really clear indication as to like when an organization's ready to start thinking about RevOps and bringing people in, a bit of an idea in terms of the different stages of when to bring in what type of person and what type of skill set within that domain. Like, one of the things I'd be keen to talk about is like how to successfully implement a RevOps strategy into your business. Now, let's like assume that this is a bit of a later stage organization with a bit more of a developed sales organization, and they're sort of ready for that like full suite of RevOps skills. What kind of advice would you be giving people in terms of how to implement?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest implementation question for these days is about where should RevOps live, which is, I think, is an implementation question. And whether that's centralized or distributed. So to me, if you have a true CRO, and there aren't many of these, in fact, I've noticed a 2024 trend that people who are like what I would call a true CRO, where they have sales, CS, and marketing. They're calling themselves president of go-to-market now. So the title elevation has continued, as you've probably seen as well. So if you have one of those, right, then you can have a true RevOps, centralized RevOps function where they're looking across sales, marketing, and customer success. In most instances, you have decentralized RevOps because you have at the very least, a separate person who runs sales and CS from the CMO. And in that case, I would not fight to pull marketing ops into, the RevOps function. RevOps in that case probably reports to the CRO, and then let marketing ops report into the CMO. Just that alignment, I think, is so important. There's no reason to necessarily pull that out. So yeah, I think yeah.
If, as you put it, a true CRO that's responsible for sales, marketing, and customer success, what's your thought process around like marketing ops continuing to report into marketing and not bringing that into like a central function to help with that kind of alignment?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a trade-off, right? Is let's say you have a great RevOps leader who has great strategy chops, great analytics chops, great planning chops, like the whole deal. Like you could argue it would be better to put your marketing ops person under in that structure, and because they're going to benefit from the leadership. But the other trade-off, though, is kind of speed and trust. That I think that trumps those other things. That if I'm I also put myself in the shoes of, I was a CMO once, and if I'm a CMO, I want my analytical right hand analytics and strategy right hand, like all the time reporting to me and not being with no threat of that person getting pulled onto other projects and so forth. So I put myself in the shoes of the CMO. I just think that agility that you gain from having that person directly report into the functional leader is really important. So
do you think that's influenced by your own bias coming from a marketing perspective as well? Like if we were to get a CRO on the line now, would they necessarily agree with that? Or like what's the contrary argument to that?
Well, I feel like I have a little bit of the luxury of having been in both marketing and sales. If someone hadn't been in marketing, I think they would try to fight for the consolidation of resources. But I think that's a human thing, right? Is humans try to grab, power, resources, money, like whatever they can. But I think the more evolved way to do it is again, put yourself in the shoes of the other person and ask yourself what's the most effective thing. And not just for the person individually, I think it's for the success of the organization. I think organizations, if you were to, it's hard to do this test, right? But like if you could A/B test and have, an organization where you had these separate CRO and CMO, and in one you had RevOps centralized, and the other one you allowed marketing ops to be within marketing. I actually think the one where marketing ops was in marketing would perform better. So it's impossible to measure.
It's like the age-old question of where should BDR sit under sales or marketing.
I have a strong opinion about that one, actually.
Well, I need to ask, what is it? Where do they sit?
Because I've run sales development in a number of different places. So my philosophy is that, first of all, you must separate inbound and outbound SDRs. And if you don't have scale, then you can't do that. But once you have scale, you must separate them. And then outbound, I strongly believe outbound SDRs should report into sales and inbound into marketing. The reason for that is because the career path for outbound sales for outbound SDRs is into sales. And they're learning the prospecting muscle. They're tied, to the AEs. They're learning the qualification muscle. It's the correct profile. In my experience, inbound SDRs, sure, there are exceptions, but inbound SDRs are building a very different muscle. They're like reactive. Yes, they're qualifying, but not as much. There's not as much persuasion and influence, right? They're not cold calling. So because they don't build that muscle, they often struggle to move into quota carrying, especially hunting oriented sales roles. And I've generally seen those inbound SDRs move into customer success, support, marketing, stay in marketing and other exciting roles. So that's my thought. And then the other piece is also alignment, that your marketing is generating MQLs, and there's always this frustration and tension between marketing and sales on actioning those MQLs. So look, let's just have marketing, drink their own champagne, eat their own dog food, whatever you want to say. And a really good example of this is when I was a CMO, I thought about two different types of leads, right? One was priority one leads, a demo request or talk to sales. And then priority two or everything else was things that a lot of people would think of as MQLs, right? Where someone maybe had a certain persona and or engagement with content, and they would score points, and then we would elevate them right to a marketing qualified lead after downloading a certain number of white papers or attending webinars or whatever. And the wake up I had when I moved into sales was the only this is a hyperbolic statement, okay, but the only valid leads are demo requests. All that other stuff, content downloads and whatever, not that's these days I'll use a more modern term. I think that's intent, right? It's like very passive intent. So my point here though is if you put the inbound SDRs in marketing, they're going to learn, right? Like they're going to learn what's a quality lead. They're going to learn to tune their MQL thresholds. And my conclusion after all that was the goal of all marketing, again, hyperbolic statement, okay? There's always exceptions, is to push people towards demo requests. And once they request the demo, then you get the salesperson right on them. So that's long-winded explanation of where I think inbound and outbound SDR should live based on a lot of experience and observation.
Yeah. So it's great to hear your take, and I've hosted maybe 8 or 9 roundtable events in the likes of San Fran, New York, Berlin, London, soon to be in Boston. That question comes up at every single dinner.
Yeah. Well, there's a new question, which is, should SDRs exist, right? Like that's the 2024 question.
And replace them with AI.
AI or just like, I mean, a lot of people will say whatever. I mean, it's fun for pundits to go around saying XYZ is dead, right? So like the 2024 thing is outbound prospecting is dead, which is not true. The outbound SDRing as a verb makes sense, but the threshold for ASP and or win rate has gone way up. So it might, you might have been efficient to have outbound SDRs selling a $20,000, $10,000 to $20,000 ACV product a couple of years ago. Not anymore. It's unless you have some exceptional win rate, which on outbound prospecting is very unlikely. Now that threshold is more like probably 40K plus ACV product. If you're below about 40K, outbound SDRing is probably not working. So I don't even know that AI is going to work. I find it irritating and annoying when people prospect me that way, and I think I'm not alone. I think the better use of money is to focus on partners. This is what we're seeing our portfolio companies do. They're either redirecting that money to develop partner channels, or they're redirecting that money to drive what I refer to as true inbound, right? To drive more demo requests. I think that's a better use of money when you have a sub, $40,000 ACV product.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, let's I could probably sit here and talk about that all day with you, Jeremy, but let's pull it back to RevOps then. So we were talking about the implementation of a successful RevOps strategy. And I think one of the things that I'd like to touch on is around like the implementation of technology. Different organizations will regularly have different technology stacks, and ensuring that alignment between sales, marketing, customer success from a technology standpoint and having the right tools is going to be fundamental to enable RevOps to be successful. But like, what does a great technology stack look like for yourself in relation to RevOps?
Yeah, well, right. There's tools for sellers, and there's also RevOps tools as well. So, the tools for sellers, what's core? You got right? A CRM core, you got data, service or services. You probably need two. I tend to recommend two data providers. You have probably some sort of sales engagement platform, like where I came from. Um, that's 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 core stuff for the sellers. Your CSMs, right, are probably going to have hopefully have some kind of a customer success system that helps them with health scoring and workflow, next best action. You got a marketing automation platform right on the marketing side, and then core RevOps tools. You kind of think back to those categories, right? You likely have some sort of revenue intelligence and forecasting type of solution for reporting and dashboards and so forth. And you probably got a comp and quota compensation execution tool. And then interestingly, some of the other stuff, a lot of companies get by without tools like territory planning and management. There are tools out there, but a lot of people get by without them. Deal desks, larger companies are going to have CPQ. So that's another core RevOps tool. And then on strategy and planning, a lot of times those tools are going to sit inside of finance, right? So the finance team might have a financial planning tool that helps them build out models. I think a lot of the strategy and planning work, frankly, is in Excel or Google Sheets, even until you're a 100 million plus, probably approaching $200 million company. Then there are some things out there that are useful for sales capacity planning. It's a bit of an emerging category. And then I guess, you can go on and on and on, but I think another very useful tool, have a whole debate about nice to have or need to have, is conversation intelligence tools for going back to the rep side. I mean, I'm a big fan of conversation.
Stuff
Yeah.
like that.
You notice I can't mention company names. So, but yes, that would be an example. Part of my regulatory restriction, I can't mention company names, but yes, companies in that category.
Gong can send me the referral fee instead, Jeremy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So it's good to hear like a high level overview from a technology standpoint. And I think implementing RevOps and that like alignment of different departments and different people is going to be a big part of implementation. Like how if you were giving me advice now around implementing this, aligning sales, marketing, customer success, and those sort of individual figureheads for each department, like what's the best advice that you'd give to someone around improving and encouraging alignment between the three sort of core areas?
Yeah, I mean, I relate back to, again, my own experiences, and a big part of it, I think, is governance around what tools you have and what the budget is for those tools. So the CFO is probably going to be very involved in that, even more than, right, like the CRO or CMO or chief customer officer. So I think a big part of that coordination, yes, it comes from RevOps, but I actually think it comes from finance, and it's setting appropriate budgets for tools. But the other part of governance is making sure that you're not adding duplicative tools to your stack.
Yeah.
And I think another 2023, 2024 trend, not I think, for sure, is consolidation of the tech stack, right? It's gotten to the point where, you might have had 3 or 4 different vendors for 3 or 4 different point solutions, but now there's been a lot of convergence and they've all cross-created second products. And now you can consolidate your tech stack right into a smaller set of vendors, which not only has purchasing and vendor management benefits, but if you've integrated whatever, I mean, a lot of people are integrating sales engagement, revenue intelligence, and conversation intelligence, next best action. Like there's probably 5 or 10 companies who have all of those 4 components, if not more. So like, it's a good time to look and say, hey, maybe I can consolidate there. So that to me I think is a big part of the governance. And I'm always remembering stories. So I mentioned earlier the AI chatbot, and that was that was a very complex orchestration in order to get that in place, because our marketing team had another chatbot, like a non-AI chatbot that was really good for marketing use cases, but really not good for customer support post-sale use cases. So, I mean, that took a lot of, talk about strategy, people, process, technology. It took a lot of people persuasion in order to get that approved. And it wasn't the money, right? It was, we're going to, on paper, to the CMO and CFO and to others, it looks like two chatbots. So why are we adding a second chatbot? And, but execution wise, very, very different, those two things. So like, that's part of the governance debate, is we could very easily have said no to that second thing and just tried to make the other one work. Wouldn't work as well, but you do what it is an optimization exercise.
Yeah. Okay. And I think another key part of RevOps is particularly around like metrics. Brought in to really understand the business, look for opportunities to improve efficiencies and increase like profitability. And a lot of the sort of key metrics that you hear thrown around, you mentioned before, around like customer acquisition costs, lifetime value. Like, from your perspective within RevOps, what are like the most fundamental metrics that any RevOps leader worth their salt should be monitoring and sort of live and die by?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was talking a little bit about those things, like customer acquisition cost is very much lagging indicators. I think the real value for RevOps people, yes, there's a whole bunch of lagging indicators, but I think it's really around some of the leading indicators. And I'm a big devotee of, I call them the PTC, Blade Logic, App Dynamics, Snowflake diaspora. It's all these people who kind of came from that heritage. And if you ask them this question, they would say they would actually use an acronym PG. It's PG all day, every day, which is pipeline generation. So I think the more critical thing for RevOps to be looking at is pipeline metrics. So you could go all the way back to activities. If activities are strongly correlated with outcomes, I would do the math on that. There are certain activities that likely are. So for instance, like proof of concepts, and like truly validated POCs that are being run, that might be a good activity, for instance, to track. But on the pipeline generation piece, it's looking on a per rep basis, what's their pipe gen over the course of whatever the appropriate period is. For a SMB rep, it might be, over the course of a week even, or 2 weeks or a month. For enterprise reps, you're probably looking at quarterly pipe gen relative to target. So it's relative to target and if you want to get super sophisticated, the way I've done it is to actually set pipe gen targets on a per person basis by adjusting for their win rates. So if someone has lower win rates, then they're going to need to generate more pipe to hit their quota. So I'll call that person adjusted pipe gen versus target. And then
so what you're saying is have like a blueprint for success for the business as a whole, but then tweak it for the individual based on their like ability, win rate, and them as an individual. I suppose that helps from an engagement perspective and getting buy-in to those KPIs as well.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, reps don't love it when they have a higher pipe gen target because their win rate is lower. But that just tells them, hey, like, you want a lower pipe gen target, you got to get more effective. And get more effective is not helpful, but it's hey, relative to your peers, you're not as effective as they are. Jane's win rate is 35%, yours is 25%. Like, going back to the conversation intelligence thing, go listen to some of Jane's calls, go ride along with Jane, like study what Jane is doing, because she's doing something that's more effective than what you're doing. Or it also focuses sales enablement that says, like, hey, if your win rate's 25% and the average is 35, then you can sort of dive in and figure out, and this is the next piece of it, is kind of funnel advancement metrics. stage to stage advancement metrics, not just top of the funnel stuff, but like mid and late stage. Where is this person getting tripped up, and how can enablement and their manager coach them up to get them more successful?
Yeah. So just to sort of like recap on that, from a metrics perspective, you've got leading versus lagging. But what you're saying is the most fundamental metrics you should be that you should be monitoring right from the get go are your leading indicators, starting off with pipeline activities, then moving into like advancement metrics. So once you've got the pipeline, how is the individual then advancing that sales that prospect through the sales process? That in that order.
Yeah, exactly. And it isn't it's leading and lagging. It's not one or the other. There's a ton of lagging stuff that we didn't talk about. Sales cycle, win rate, ACV, NRR, huge, right? So yeah, all those things are critical.
And then what about like going back to those the lagging indicators from a RevOps perspective? You know, you've talked about pipeline activities for an individual. You've talked about like advancement metrics for the individual as well. But like using like customer acquisition costs as a whole and tying that back to like all the different channels of customer acquisition, like talk me through like experience of that and why that plays a fundamental part within the RevOps function.
Yeah, I historically RevOps kind of stopped at, you know, the stuff I've already talked about, NRR, on lagging indicators, NRR, win rate, sales cycle, and so forth. And typically finance took the domain of like looking at customer acquisition cost, looking at LTV, lifetime value, looking at the ultimate metric, Rule of 40, which is the combination of ARR growth and free cash flow margin. So like that I think those metrics tend to still be more the domain of finance versus RevOps, but I think RevOps people are getting more into managing cost, because before it was all revenue, bookings. But now the pressure is on to manage costs. So I think they definitely are looking much more at customer acquisition cost. On the sales side, right? That's what you're spending on, mostly people, right? Quota bearing and non-quota bearing people. So what I'm seeing a lot more RevOps people do on that side is to, like, the questions I'm getting is they want ratios. Like, how many SDRs should I have? You know, how many per AE? How many sales engineers should I have per AE? What should be my span of control? Like, these are the types of things that people are looking for, I think, efficiency metric wise. But on the marketing side, it's really marketing was probably even more savvy on cost management than sales was, because right, marketing was managing people was managing people and program expenditure, and they're constantly optimizing, especially on the program side, right? A program would be your search engine marketing on LinkedIn or search engine marketing on Google, or, social spend on LinkedIn, whatever. That I think the marketing team in general and marketing operations was more savvy on cost than sales was until, starting about a year and a half ago.
Could those kind of like knowing those metrics, particularly for like different routes to market of acquiring new customers, help you steer like which avenues you lean into? So like earlier you were talking about scoring particular accounts so that reps could prioritize different accounts in terms of which ones they want to be going after. But then there's the other side of that is like, what's your route to market? Like if I look at my recruitment business, we've got, indirect through third-party relationships. You've got direct, like selling direct to vendors. You've got events, conferences, all these different routes to winning business, which all has a customer acquisition cost attached to that different channel. Yeah. So how much did that play a part in terms of your account scoring and territory planning?
It does. So, I mean, I think the most sophisticated RevOps organizations are basically building a plan that says, with targets for the contribution by source, exactly as you outlined. And the sources are usually, right, like let's separate new logos from expansion. So on the new logo side, right, is it partner generated? Is it AE self-sourced? Is it SDR sourced? Right? Is it marketing sourced? So you're sort of thinking about all these like X sourced leads and X sourced pipeline, X sourced bookings, and yeah, setting those targets and then holding the teams accountable to hitting, their individual targets. So that's the more sophisticated organizations are doing that, and that's critical.
Yeah. No, well, thanks for that. I think in terms of like final sort of topic around RevOps has to come back to people. This is our domain when it comes to like going out to market and finding people for organizations out there. From your perspective, like what are the key traits that like a top performing RevOps individual contributor or leader possess? Like what are the skills that you believe are required to be successful in this kind of role?
Yeah. I'm going to give you sort of two answers to that. I'll give you the direct answer to your question, and then I'm going to talk about talent Moneyball after that. So like the direct traits I look for, and you can kind of hear the subtext of it. And I always worry about projecting my own background here, but project management, right? High analytical skill, attention to detail, process design and optimization, being entrepreneurial, great communications and cross-functional collaboration skills. And then maybe two more. I've found in hiring RevOps people that those with some degree of consulting training, so strategic problem solving, is really critical, and you learn that as a consultant. It's a very teachable thing, but if you got someone who comes in with that ability beforehand, great. And then if the person's the team leader, right, is the usual stuff, no matter whether you're in RevOps or other things, hiring, coaching, performance management. So like to me, those are the traits that that I try to assess when I'm hiring a RevOps person. My other comment is about money. Well, I'll call this talent Moneyball. I have not done this for RevOps yet, and I intend to do it for every role over time. I love to do this thing where I go and look at everyone. I'll say let's say SDRs. Okay, I did this for SDRs a while back. I pulled the profiles of I think 1,500 SDRs across the tech industry, and I defined success in the role based on LinkedIn, because that's all I have, as they were promoted to an AE inside of the organization that they were hired into. Like that's, I think, a great measure of success for an SDR. And then I paid contractors to pull all the biographical data on them. Where did they go to school? What did they study? Did they play sports? Were they in band? Whatever. Did they work during college? ... And like out of that, I can then take those 1,500 profiles and I can say, okay, I can play some Moneyball here. You're more likely to be success. It's correlation, not causation, but you're more likely to be successful as an SDR if you have XYZ traits. So like with that study, what we found was people who had 2+ years in professional services, in particular as recruiters at agencies, those people made like there was a big enough pool of those people, and they made great SDRs. There were other pools where there just aren't a lot of people, but they're good. So ex-military was good. Teachers who leave, education and go. Teachers is a big one, yeah. And if you talk to a lot of sales leaders, I'll tell you, ex-teachers make great salespeople, so B2B salespeople. So like there were other surprising things. So for instance, everyone loves to hire for sports. Well, it turns out that if you look overall for SDRs anyway, sports doesn't matter. But if you double click on it, having played team sport didn't matter. So whatever, baseball, basketball, soccer, football. But individual sports, though, was correlated with success. So, and I would call like gymnastics has a team component, but that's individual, right? So gymnastics or golf or tennis or what have you, right? So these things were correlated with success. So anyway, we sort of did that Moneyball profile and said, okay, I can get a little bit of an edge by sourcing candidates who fit that profile. And so I intend to do that with RevOps too. I just haven't gotten around to that one yet.
Nice. So we did something similar for recruiters. So we take a Moneyball approach to hiring for this. Just again, you play the numbers. Obviously you hire based on the individual, but if you put the data in your favor, you've got a better chance of that individual being successful. And that's with a combination of disc profiling, emotional intelligence assessments, general intelligence assessments, plus like key characteristic traits that we hired for. So I'd love to see the report on the BDR stuff.
There's a
bit of a red flag for me as a recruiter. Your views on the success of recruiters in the BDR role.
Yeah. The one that you mentioned, personality test, IQ test. So there's a separate study. It's probably 50 years old, but really, really good. And Google relies on this study pretty significantly. But there's basically, if you look at all the academic studies, 3 things matter if you can test for them. IQ, which you said already, is like the number 1 predictor of success in the job. Number 2 is conscientiousness. And those things can be assessed. Those 2 things can be assessed by tests, pretty clear tests. The third one is like a job skills test. Can they do the job you're going to ask them to do? Give them a project. Yeah. That's what they're going to do. That's obvious. It's more effortful than the other 2. I will say that I once had all of our company I was working for, I had all the reps take a personality test basically, and calibrated that personality test, right, to build a profile based on our best reps versus our worst reps. And then we applied that that test to new hires as we were bringing them in. And in the end, I found the juice wasn't worth the squeeze on that one, because the personality test sort of gave you a lot of information that seemed useful, but I think it was the illusion of usefulness. And we didn't actually, the intent was to say like, we would yes, maybe know people based on the personality test, but we never really implemented. So there could have been a last mile execution problem on that, but my net is like, I'm super skeptical about personality tests.
I agree. It's just good. It's a good tool for the interview.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't yes or no them based on the results of the test, but that would be a massive driver of the interview and where the conversation ended up going. But I'm guessing based on what you've said there around conscientiousness, you've read the Harvard Business Review of like the 7 top traits of highly effective salespeople, because that's one of them.
Yeah. Well, it's really true for any job. Is conscientiousness is kind of critical. Like what job? Maybe it's an obvious statement, but it's if you have 100 things to evaluate, which one or ones are important, and it turns out that conscientiousness is one of them, and that's one I think back channel reference checks is also super useful for. The personality assessments can theoretically tease that out. I've taken a lot. I do consider myself an extremely conscientious person. Hopefully other people would say that about me as well. But I think I've taken maybe 10 of those personality tests in my life, and 9 out of 10 times they did say I was like highly conscientious. I took one not too many years ago that said like, that flagged me for conscientiousness risk, which I had a good chuckle over.
I think the evidence is there, Jeremy, with your conscientiousness. Even just like if you look at the SellingSherpa, to go to that amount of trouble for the greater good says a lot about you as an individual. But I think this is probably like a really nice place for us to bring the conversation to a close here. There's one last question that I did want to ask. So given you are such an avid reader, an avid student, particularly of all things sales, I'd like to ask, like, what is your favorite non-fiction book and why?
I probably don't. Well, sales related book. I probably don't just have one. I have a couple recommendations that I think are timely and good. Huge fan of John McMahon's Qualified Sales Leader. It's a must read. I really like The Jolt Effect, which is a newer book by the Challenger salespeople. I'm not a big fan of the Challenger sale book, by the way. I just don't think there's enough in there. But The Jolt Effect, I think there was. So yeah, those are 2 good ones. Cracking the Sales Management Code, a little older but good. Yeah, so many good ones and so many bad ones, but I think those are a few.
And when you're not reading sales books, what else are you reading?
I read my pattern is I read a lot of fiction and nonfiction in different genres. I love and the nonfiction side, business biographies and
Yeah.
The usual popular stuff out there, I guess. But I read mostly fiction. I read a ton of sci-fi, and then I read literary fiction, and I read both. So right now I usually have 3 books going simultaneously, and my fiction book I'm reading right now is I'm rereading Anna Karenina, which is one of my favorite books. So I love Russian literature.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, listen, Jeremy, it's been an absolute privilege to sit here and pick the brains of someone that's, studies the art and sat into sales as avidly as you do. But, the conversation's been great. So I really appreciate you giving up your time. I'm sure everyone listening is going to take a lot from this. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want more information about the podcast, head over to our website, Scale with Strive.